The story for Endfield Patch 1.1 has been rightfully lauded as a step in the right direction, offering more emotional weight and life to the setting than was previously shown in the game's launch state. Though it was relatively brief, it only took me a couple of days to finish it out, and Patch 1.2, coming in with Rossi, is promising to be more substantial in story scope. Still, the deeper dive into the life and social political entanglements among the QINGBO Stockade residents is a very welcome addition to the narrative as a whole. It's also one that leaves me with a lot of unsettling questions. Now, a lot of this seems to have been chalked up by the community at large as pacing issues, or overlooked plot details, or just some shortcomings in how the QINGBO residents are portrayed as a whole, and some aspects of this I'm inclined to agree with. You have a bunch of proudly ignored knuckleheads running around ignoring safety standards and almost blowing up the whole place because they have a knack for tinkering but no understanding of pressure management. You tend to want to treat him as an idiot. But the more I think about the bits of lore and messages we've gotten in the aftermath of the 1.1 story, the more it seems like there's something fundamentally wrong with QINGBO Stockade. Not as a shortcoming of writing, but something far more sinister. Let's go over the facts. Thanks to weapon lore, we know that QINGBO Stockade was founded within the first couple of generations of Talos 2 settlement, sometime after the First Agaloy War, and as an immediate consequence of the Powder Keg social tensions that resulted in the Humiliation War thereafter. While it doesn't appear as if they were active participants in either side of the Civil War, we do know that the early QINGBO Stockade had a surprising amount of material science expertise and competence among its founders, the enormous and complex water wheel system found throughout the main camp, and still an obvious architectural influence in the Sky King Flats as a result of their work. More impressively, so is the advanced water filtration system in the hidden heart of the Ancestral Spring, as uncovered in the side story. Notably, the device is pre-Sheernite, even possibly pre-settlement, credited as a marvel of Terran-era engineering that still managed to function and provide for the Stockade community for over a century before we were forced to seal it upon discovering its increasingly degraded functions. In fact, overall, the Stockaders appear to have a cultural knack for tinkering, necessarily a part of their survival strategy for over a century, given their total dependency on the Ancestral Spring. But this is almost entirely contained within verbal mnemonics rather than written down. Those few travelers that do pass by the area, such as the anonymous sketcher entranced by their water wheel heritage, even notice a strange slowness from the otherwise proud and lively QINGBO residents, as if anything more advanced than messing with rulings, runoffs, and trashes beyond the scope of their abilities. Evidence is all over the stockades of that particular deficiency. While the primary water wheel south of the main base is still in obvious operation, the smaller ones that once fed contraptions throughout the town are in an advanced state of disrepair, and our very first introduction to Sky King Flats was even to adjust otherwise simple pipeworks to allow the gate to open properly. Among the QINGBO residents that aren't illiterate, unlike poor Tauntaun, there is documented history of their ancestors' near-mythical accomplishments, not just in mechanical engineering, but even animal husbandry as well. Yet in the same notes we discover throughout the stockade, the point is made again and again that these are lost arts, as if the fog of history has descended upon the techniques and technologies utilized generations ago. Which is weird. QINGBO Stockade is not an isolated sentinel island, only recently reintroduced to civilization at large. The history of struggle with mainstream Talos 2 Yanese culture is an ongoing one rich in skullduggery, smuggling, some light scamming, and even sabotage. Their population isn't just that of the original HAS dissidents that fled the Humiliation Wars, but rogues and runaways from Wu Ling as well, and the population leakage runs both ways, particularly as evidenced by Mifu's high-level employment and the Wu Ling government. Now, if this was all some kind of bigoted commentary on conservative traditionalists and tribalistic primitives, I lose a lot of respect for Hyperglyphs writers. But I have reason to believe otherwise. That instead, this is shaping up to be analogous to a real-world phenomena, where supposedly superior cultural rivals are looking down upon a population unjustifiably, ignorant of a physical malady that they're lucky to be unaffected by. In real life, there is an ancient plague running through the global south, causing listlessness and fish-eyed stares among its victims, and has a tendency to engender a reputation among them for laziness and, frankly, moronic imbecility. In reality, it's an insidious and widespread presence of hookworms found among humid agricultural areas, where skin exposure to wet soil is all that's needed to develop a mild rash between the toes that steadily turns into something much, much worse. It's an insidious killer, not just because of the obvious illness it causes, but the damage it does to the affected cultures. Now, I believe there's evidence towards something similar affecting the QINGBO stockades, a dark shadow in the wires that they have no adequate protection against, and which Wuling would have been ignorant about as well. After all, there's no chance in hell that the QINGBO residents would have allowed the Tanshi they have a bitter history with to come anywhere close to the ancestral springs, and the filter device at its heart. Now, much of this is going to be speculation, but I would like to claim not groundless in its form. Much of this is also rooted in the theory in my previous video that much of the conflict in Talos 2 is underlined by collapsal influence, the extra-dimensional outside context problem for Arknights that has a distressing number of overlaps with the Aether Blight phenomena ever present in Endfield. At the core of it all, we know that the ancestral spring filter is imperfect. Now, this has nothing to do with the fact that we found it well past its expected end-of-life operational timeline, but evidence elsewhere in the stockade. Its purification effects are limited to the waters coming in from the north of QINGBO. Down south, below old graffiti scribbles of fish implied to be Tauntau's childhood antics, a murky pool of contaminated waters lies in the quiet stillness of the Bladewoods residentials, suggesting that even the residents' careful cultivation of freshwater sources are inadequate to prevent exposure to blight-ridden waters. Among the residents themselves, especially with evidence for the stockade camp deliberately hidden from Tauntaun, there are some surprising cultural overlaps between them and the one other blight-affected faction we've interacted with, if only in terms of mutual violence. Though Yanni's literacy is apparently limited in QINGBO, with somehow nobody available to give their chief's adopted daughter proper lessons by the time she grew up, the Seekers of Lost Treasures side story gives numerous examples of an alternative pictographic script utilized in its stead. One whose style and usage greatly resembles the witch runes used by Bonecrusher Landbreakers. In the same hidden villa, we see that elder brother Ron Yi has been busy with mask making, but not all of them are of the bow-horned Forte or other races represented among the eclectic Yan-descended people. Disturbingly, pipe-faced Bonecrusher masks are among them, despite their interactions with QINGBO Stockade as extremely recent development, per Ron Yi's personal notes regarding Neferet's overwhelming displays of power. In fact, there's a lot of inferred framework in patch 1.1 that suggests that Ron Yi himself has been contaminated, not by the more common symptoms of oropathy, as he very obviously lacks the mineralization commonly found among oropathy victims. We are even given a stark and solemn reminder of what terminal oropathy actually looks like, with the ossified and blocky remnants of an anti-wheeling arts practitioner found in the soul and unminable Originium node in the stockades. As shown in his flashback, Rodney's red right hand was the result of an open wound sustained during the ill-fated conflict from 10 years prior that resulted in the death of his father and other QINGBO seniors. We know that same night was a result of Wuling's dam breaking, disastrously flooding the entire region in Blightwater and leading to the humanitarian crisis that drove QINGBO to desperate raiding just to feed their children. Logically then, Rodney's affliction isn't oropathy, but shall we call it aetheropathy? Now, if we assume that mild aetheropathy is a common QINGBO health concern, and we further extended logic that aether and blight-related phenomena are related to collapsals, a number of puzzle pieces fall into place. During the Arknights mission event against collapsals, the Rhode Island team is able to increase the difficulty of the challenge by taking on a number of collapsal paradigms. In terms of gameplay, these are merely difficulty modifiers to increase enemy toughness, damage, cost of certain items, so on and so forth. But the descriptors for the paradigms are suggestions of further depth of lore regarding how collapsals corrupt the world within their sphere of influence. 3 of those paradigms are particularly noteworthy when discussing QINGBO. Number 1, dequantification. The concept of numbers steadily become indistinct, making the passing down of scientific and mathematical knowledge increasingly difficult, and thereby severing the ties between QINGBO and their ancestral legacy as Tianxi descendants. While oral tradition does help mitigate the impact of collapsal dequantification, their ancestral legacy has become the stuff of myth within a mere century. 2. Pan-society paradox. The very essence of civilization has become twisted, most notably demonstrated in how the perceived value of material goods has drifted between mainstream Yanni society on Talos 2 and with the Stockade. While the drift isn't yet terminal, the severe cruelty of the Bone Crushers still come as a shock to even the most hot-blooded QINGBO residents. It has impacted them enough that wielding requires cultural experts just to interface with them. And 3. Emotional entity. When the innermost negative emotions become an actual monster, and that hollowed-out monster's ox that has consumed Ronnie in his final moments is a stark and inarguable example of this very phenomenon. But if we can posit this as evidence of collapsal influence as a reason for the underlying strangeness of QINGBO society, we come across a number of hypotheses regarding the incident of a decade prior. Collapsal corruption takes on a number of forms, but chief among them is the loss of face in a very literal sense. While film and photography is able to cut through the distortion, direct sapient observation of a collapsal victim's face becomes increasingly difficult. Now, this would explain the prevalence of masks among the blight-maddened bone crushers, and might even explain why ceremonial masks are so common among stockaders too. Furthermore, the affliction has to have been common enough for cultural traditions to develop in the first place. If the ruling outpost, and indeed most of the civilization band, was under siege by Aether-born collapsals 10 years prior, then the nature of their panic that fateful night becomes obvious. All around, the soon-to-be city was under siege by monsters in human form, ones with horrifyingly blurred-out faces and obvious bloodlust. Amid the obscuring fog, a supply runner's security team runs into hostile forces. The locals are expecting just the usual ruffians, perhaps sympathizing with the desperation they mutually face despite rising tensions. But they have a job to do, and the usual scuffle results. In that scuffle, a mask gets knocked off, and the war veterans see, or more importantly, are unable to see, what's underneath. And thus, a tragedy becomes inevitable. Let's clean up a couple of loose ends. 1. Tauntaun's obvious robust health might partially be due to her oropathy. While oropathic treatment is available to Stockade residents thanks partially to their own lootings and partially to the guilt of wielding security members that survived the incident, I'm inclined to argue that her actual exposure to the medicine was rare. She actively avoids needles and can hardly be told what to do by anybody but Ronnie within the Stockade. Rather, the inherently antagonistic relationship between Originium and Aether seems to have worked out in her favor. She practices her obscure and strangely powerful arts freely and has some suspicions about its origins as well, asserting Originium's influence over what trace amounts of blight she might otherwise be exposed to. 2. We didn't fight Ronnie alone. The fight against the emotional entity from Ronnie's guilt and rage necessitated the use of naturally spawning Zeronite orbs to counteract the Aether-empowered shield and vines sprouted by his boss form, or at least we assumed it was Zeronite. But while the green energy is certainly emblematic of Wu Ling, its presence in QINGBO is downright odd. The ancestral spring is not fed by the Zeronite dam. Zeronite itself was an expensive and precious resource before Enfield's arrival, to which Wu Ling could scarcely provide any excess, making it highly unlikely to be the result of downriver effluvia from QINGBO's city cousins. We do know that Zeronite itself isn't just carbon and water, of course. That's just the physical substrate used to contain the energies of a Ferrimut Originium energy hybridization, and is explicitly the crystallization of the Ferrimut component we use in our newest batteries. The Ferrimut land gods of Terra are no strangers to the fight against collapsals either, having known for a long time that they're capable of directly harming the extra-dimensional threat, even if it might cost them their own flesh and blood to do so. And indeed, it is because the other way around is equally valid that I think Ardashir made such an attempt to recruit Ronnie. His interest in Ronnie would have largely been driven by the simple fact that the QINGBO leader represented that it was possible at all to condition the people for the aetherized universe's internal laws and still retain some semblance of sanity. But to go a step further and empower him directly suggests more than academic interests. The powers that be on Talos 2 aren't just nations and megacorporations, but demigods and other esoterics. Risking Ronnie's death against conventional wielding forces would have been a drastic waste of resources. Not if Ardashir's real hope is to groom him as a god killer. After all, successfully goring the sleeping god within the heart of Wu Ling with the horns of an aetherized ox demon That act alone might be enough to wipe out civilization on Talos 2. We'll go more in depth on why I think this to be the case next time when we address the jade-collared elephant in the room. Just what the hell is Sheer Knight really?